Hello, ladies and gentlemen, conference delegates. I'm Gerald Van Jackson. I'm the Lib Dem leader here at the LGA, and it's my great honour and pleasure to introduce the party president of the Lib Dems, Sal Brinton. Sal will be known to many Lib Dems, as she's been a member, an active member for many, many years. Sal comes from a local government background, having been a councillor in Cambridgeshire. But she's here to talk to us about how things go after the general election. Sal is here as both the Lib Dems and Labour have looking for new party leaders. So Sal has very kindly stepped into the breach to make sure that Lib Dems here have a voice and to tell us where things might be going. And I think that also a particularly interesting thing to talk about and in questions after this is to think about the role of the House of Lords over the next Parliament, where we've had significant success over the last Parliament in influencing legislation from the LGA to make things better, to work through some of the problems and issues that people in central government and civil servants hadn't thought through when legislation started in the Commons, to make it significantly better through the House of Lords, so when it affects real people, it's not as bad as it was first thought to be. I hope Sal will be able to say a little bit about that, but also a little bit about where she thinks local government should be going and the challenges that will be facing us, all of us, over the next 5 years. Thank you. Sal.
Well, I've negotiated the first part. It's always slightly alarming when the lectern is sort of overhanging a cliff edge when you're in a wheelchair. Thank you, Gerald, and thank you so much for the invitation to speak to you today. And as Gerald has said, I'm here as president of the Lib Dems, and in the absence of a leader, I think the phrase we're using to describe my current role is de facto leader for another 3 weeks. To work, and I know the Liberal Democrats want to work with all parties and of none to make sure that the brilliant things that local government has done across the country are known and celebrated. Well, the Lib Dems have had an election where we got a good kicking from the electorate, so it would be arrogant and foolish for me to suggest that we'd got all the answers to the problems facing our nation. But any conference that will happen this year, the LGA conference represents people working from all political parties together, bringing us together on what brings us our knowledge, our understanding of the needs of the communities we represent, and of a common desire to find solutions to these problems. Lib Dem elected mayors, council leaders and councillors have come up with innovative solutions to the problems that their communities face. But so too have councillors from all parties. My time as a county councillor showed me that local government has the answer to many of the questions that the government and all political parties are asking, and I want to address a few of these in my speech. So, Lib Dem councils have come up with some brilliant ideas across the country, and you would expect me to say nothing less. But whether it is more affordable housing in rural South Lakeland, or the integration of health and social care in the London Borough of Sutton, devolution in Greater Manchester with Stockport working alongside councils of other political persuasions, or Bedford and its town centre regeneration. But I also recognise that councils of all political colour and of none have done good work too. What brings us together here today as people who passionately believe in local government is the knowledge and belief that local is the answer to many questions, and the political hue of a council is often secondary to that. And the first is on social care. Now, it's an area I have a strong interest in, as I am the Lib Dem House of Lords spokesperson on the integration of health and social care. The LGA has rightly been raising concerns over funding of our social care services for many years now, and the warnings over a creaking care system have been proven correct. To suggest that the problems in the NHS and with A&E have nothing to do with the huge cuts in government funding for social care from councils is just laughable. The Liberal Democrats supported moves to integrate health and social care when in government. For example, over the creation of health and well-being boards, of pooling care budgets through the Better Care Fund, and returning public health to local government. Now, ministers from all parties over the years have called for an integration between health and social care, but none have had the courage to make this happen despite some pockets of good practice. But what will the government do to help you, as local authorities, in delivering social care services and to work more closely with the health service? Next week, it announces its emergency budget. Now, it could use this as an opportunity to listen to the LGA, the King's Fund and others, and do more to support joined-up thinking on health and social care, protecting the most vulnerable. But with over £12 billion worth of cuts planned by the government, the omens are not good. Take last month. On the 5th of June, the government announced around 200 million a year cut, in-year cut from public health. And many of you are saying that your local authorities have allocated this year's public health grant budget in full. Most of this money is spent on services commissioned from the NHS and also the private and voluntary sector on contracts. So now you and your councils are going to be forced to look at short-term cuts that do not break contracts. We all know that making cuts in haste means the wrong decisions are made, and I worry that this will happen again. What should you cut back exactly? The programme to encourage people to stop smoking? Work to encourage more people to keep fit and to tackle obesity? Initiatives to reduce binge drinking? A good public health programme involves joint working with local health services to stop people from getting ill or needing expensive medical treatment in the first place. Despite being treated and created as a national health service, we know that over the decades it has become a national ill health service. This in-year cut does not bode well for integration. And of course, this will mean a cut to local government in future years as well, if you're having to raid other budgets to make the cut happen. The second area is over affordable housing. In your LGA First 100 Days publication, you campaigned for affordable housing. And you noted that over 3 million adults aged 20 to 34 live with their parents. I'm one of those parents. House prices are rising faster than average earnings. And there are 1.7 million households on the waiting lists across England alone. So I have very strong concerns over the plan to extend right to buy housing association properties. There are three obvious problems with the plan. Firstly, that it reduces social rented stock, especially in areas where it would be very difficult to build any replacement. Secondly, that it risks forcing independent charities to dispose of assets than less than market value. That's something that's against the principle of charities from the Charity Commission. And thirdly, that recent reports point to a 1 billion shortfall in the funding of the scheme. Councils around the country donate their land for free so that social housing can be built. Will you do so in the future if the homes are going to be sold off to the highest bidder? I was recently told of one such case of a sheltered block run by a housing association for retired Army and Service Force families. Will selling off these flats really help us to achieve the Armed Forces Covenant that so many councils have been proud to sign? I don't think so. But as an added burden to the local government, we have the proposal that the government will pay for this by forcing councils to sell off some of their remaining housing stock. If the government really has over 5 billion available for social housing, isn't it a better idea that this money is put into building more desperately needed social housing, not on a policy that will create not one single new home for our communities? Believe me, we will hold the government to account over these plans, particularly focusing on how they plan to ensure a one-for-one replacement of homes sold in the local area. And we need to do more to ensure that more houses are built overall. And I hope that the experience of local government will be listened to by government and all political parties. In the Lords, we now have strong representatives from all parties to argue the case. Jeremy Beecham, Cathy Bakewell, Margaret Eaton, Barbara Jank, Richard Best, Kath Pinnock and many others all fight hard for local government. And now that the dust has settled after the general election, both the LGA and central government would be well advised to start to implement its findings. The third area is over the future funding of local government and devolution. And I know at this conference you are doing a lot of work to highlight the concerns over a local government funding cap of 9.5 billion by the end of the decade. It's a terrifying thought. But with this challenge also comes an opportunity. If the government are willing to listen, they could provide councils with devolving the tools they need to help cope with these further cuts in funding. There is still so much more that could be done to integrate health and social care. The reality is we have only just scratched the surface in this area. Ministers, civil servants and health managers have all fought for many years to stop the real integration that we know is needed, often trying to protect their own budgets. And in order to make sure that precious resources are used to maximise the effect, local government will need good advocacy at the heart of Whitehall and also at the heart of Westminster. Alongside the ongoing lobbying from the LGA, the presence of a new Secretary of State for Local Government could provide an opportunity for local government to be better understood in both the Treasury and, vitally, in the Department of Health. So the current devolution agenda offers an exciting opportunity to see real change in the way this country is run, a change I know many of you came into politics for. We need to make sure that true and meaningful devolution of powers is achieved. But it is also vital that no areas of the country are excluded from this opportunity. And I believe that any devolution of power as a result of the Cities and Local Government Bill should face three tests. Will devolution be ambitious enough to allow the council or councils to tackle the challenges they face head on? Will new authorities be sufficiently democratic, allowing a full scrutiny of decisions and responding to what the public want for their area without imposing structures from the top down, especially financial ones? And lastly, will the process be fair so that every area in the country has the opportunity to benefit from the advantages to be gained from devolution? From my point of view, the Lib Dems have a unique role to play in this. Our roots, our philosophy, our soul are all in local action, local decision making and local delivery of services. We value local government in its own right, and we don't see it as a simple cog in the Whitehall machinery. My late and much missed Liberal Democrat colleague, Conrad Russell, had this to say: "Commitment to the autonomy of local government was one of the causes which first drew the Liberal Party together. Our instinctive preference has always been for devolving power downwards wherever possible, for returning power towards the people who are its source." But perhaps Joe Grimmond had it best, and he would have castigated Conrad for his words. He said in 1983, "I do not like the word devolution. It implies that power rests at Westminster, from which centre maybe some is graciously devolved. I would rather begin by assuming that power should rest with the people who entrust it to their representatives to discharge the essential tasks of government. You, as councillors and your senior officers, are the closest democracy we have to the people. So my thanks go to all of you at the LGA and your councillors. The case you make for localising decision-making and delivery of services is, for me and the Liberal Democrats, unanswerable. The briefings you give me and others in Parliament are powerful and effective. The voice that you have within your parties is powerful and needs listening to. The time for local as the answer to so many problems is now. So thank you to listening today, and thank you for all the work you do for your communities across the country. All councillors of all parties or of none have a pivotal and vital role, not just in working for the services our communities need, but also in pressing the government and our parties to devolve meaningful powers and resources down to local levels and away from London. Thank you.
Colleagues, Sal has very kindly said that she will happily answer some questions. Sal, do you want to do it from lectern or back here?
I'm on my way back, trying
You're on the
to
way
fall
back.
over the edge.
Excellent. So, I think, Jade, do we have any mics, roving mics? Yes, we do. Hurrah. We have people. So can you identify yourselves, A, to say who you are, and which authority you're from, and make sure you're clear and distinct so Sal can answer you properly. So, should we do the lady number 3 to begin with?
Marie Strong, Norfolk County Council. You referred to the government's policy or proposal for right to buy, and the government has said it needs time to think about its proposal before it implements it. I am particularly concerned about our independent charities, and in Norfolk, particularly divisions like mine, where the number of second homes depletes availability of homes for locals. Will the House of Lords swiftly take advantage of this thinking time to persuade government of the error of this proposal?
Thank you.
Shall I respond?
Yep.
Thank you, Marie. There is a very serious concern, and I suspect one of the reasons the government have proposed a delay and time to think about it is that the consequences of the proposals are just coming home for them. And certainly there are many housing associations and charities that provide specialist accommodation who are now getting in touch with the government to say they're alarmed. This came up the other day at the Charities Bill second reading debate, and I know that particularly for charities there is a very important problem because they have a fiduciary duty when they sell assets to make sure they get best value for them, which is contradictory to much of what is being proposed in the bill. And just as an aside, one of the peers suggested that if you were a charity that was commissioned mainly to carry out public work, whether it was Whitehall or local government, you shouldn't be allowed to be called a registered charity because you were really just part of public services. Quite a few people from local government and myself said that we felt was inappropriate. The charities still work as a charity.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have number 1 near the back. Yep. Yes?
Okay, sorry, I wasn't sure I was near the back. Dina Romero, Lib Dem Group Leader for Bath and North East Somerset. We're currently being threatened with the double whammy of firstly an elected mayor for an area that contains a small city and also surrounded by a rural area, and secondly, overlaying that, a super mayor for the whole region, likely to include 3 other local authorities. So would you agree that the devolution offer is likely to be undermined by new layers of bureaucracy and is so likely to be more costly? And I'll be interested to know what your advice would be, and perhaps we should maybe agree to have either one or neither.
Right, I'm going to cop out of the last bit of your question and say what should the advice to Bath and North East Somerset be. But also just for background for those that don't know me, I was Deputy Chair of the East of England Development Agency, and before that I was one of the Vice Chairs of the East of England Regional Assembly. So I have had in the past some experience of devolution, and that was devolution, although some powers from local government went up. The Lib Dems are very clear that we shouldn't impose elected mayors on communities. It's important that local areas and communities decide what they want for exactly the reason that Dina has just cited. It may be sensible for a large area like Greater Manchester to choose to have an elected mayor, or indeed to choose not to have an elected mayor. but one size does not fit all, and there's a real issue for many rural areas where there's a small city or a town in the middle, and often those rural areas, as I know from my Cambridgeshire days, feel that all the resources are going into the centre of the donut. And that's why it has to be with community support. And I think one of the things that most worries me about the bill that's going through the Parliament at the moment is this imposition on an area, whether they want it or not. I know that my party and other parties are going to continue to oppose some of that. I do also remain concerned that, and I'm going to say Whitehall here, because this isn't just about the current government, focuses very much on urban models and doesn't really understand rural models of local government.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I think we have another one here, number 3, yes, thank you.
Hi, Sarah Osborne, leader of the Lib Dem group at Lewes District Council. I'm really concerned about how children from low-income families in rural areas will be able to access post-16 educational training, given that county councils, such as East Sussex County Council, are proposing to cut subsidised transport to colleges. How on earth are young people going to afford to continue in what is now compulsory participation in education or training?
I think that's the key point, Sarah, and I'm waiting for the first court case to happen, because I'm sure there will be. For families that can't afford the fares, it will be, and particularly in rural areas where buses are limited in any event, it's going to become very serious, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are challenges, and very, very quickly. And I know that further education colleges over the last few years have increasingly been trying to resolve their own transport issues because of the pressure on transport budgets, but that's often not possible in a very rural area where there may be a small sixth form that's covering quite a large rural area, and young people have to travel to get there. So no, I would agree with your concern, and it's a shame that although this was talked about to some extent in the general election, it doesn't seem to have had any favour at all with the Conservative government, and we continue to need to lobby about that.
Okay, just behind you, Mr Tutt.
Thank you. David Tutt, leader of Eastbourne Borough Council. The government finance settlement for local government sale takes no account at all of our need to spend money on tourism-related industries, despite the fact that for coastal resorts such as Eastbourne, and indeed many inland destinations like Harrogate, it's the main industry. At the same time, the level of VAT that's rated in the UK is far greater than almost any other country, putting our tourism destinations at a disadvantage. Would you be prepared to raise this inequality issue with the government?
I'm more than happy to do it. I can tell you that the issue of tourism comes up often in questions in the Lords, and there have been debates about it. And my colleague Jane Bonham-Carter is our lead on DCMS, and I know she'd be happy to do that. Interestingly, we don't often hear the council argument. It's often directly from the tourism base. So that might be something that through the LGA, peers become better informed about. That would be very helpful. And if I can help, obviously, please let me know.
I'm sorry, in Portsmouth I think we've got 16,500 jobs that are tourism dependent, and that puts the arms industry, which is our other big thing, into the shade. So it's a hugely important part of our business. I think we have number 4 over.
Thank you very much. Bill Winlow, Liberal Democrat leader, Lancashire County Council. I've been very interested to hear what you had to say on devolution. But much of what I've heard at this conference has been about decentralisation and doesn't talk about what new electoral processes we may need. So I just wondered, exactly, is the old idea of elected regional assemblies now dead? And if so, what new democratic organisation will be needed to make these new devolved procedures work, depending on how we put them together locally? And finally, do we need a constitutional convention, as they had in Scotland? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. You've also sort of strayed into what I would describe as the evil territory, English votes for English laws, and where local government sits with that is also very important. And the Lib Dem view is that we should be having a constitutional convention to look at all the different tiers and where decisions are made. It's absolutely critical, because what the public don't want is more tiers of bureaucracy, more reasons for councils or regions to say it's their fault, it's not ours. We have to have transparency and accountability. We don't particularly like the Conservative proposal for a group of English MPs being able to vote on English laws. And just before the election, we said if that was going to happen, it ought to be done by PR rather than by using the current first-past-the-post system. But I suspect we won't win that argument. Are regional assemblies dead and gone? I think they are. The North East referendum made it pretty clear at the time that that wasn't. But if a small region wanted to have its own form, Lib Dems would say, that's fine. If local government and the region agree that that's the best way they want to be governed, then they should be allowed to do that.
Okay. And number 4 again, thank you. Yes, gentleman with the yellow tie. And then young lady in a green jacket in the middle.
Edward Kearns, Cambridgeshire County Council, Vice Chair of Economy and Environment. Sally, you spoke about the need for fiscal freedom, recognising that Cambridge is one of the powerhouses economically and indeed culturally in the country. What more can councils do, and also government, in terms of the House of Lords in particular, to encourage the Treasury to relax its iron vice grip?
Oh gosh, that's the impossible question, isn't it? I think you have to keep continuing to fight. And the advantage that Cambridgeshire has is, as with Manchester and with some of the M4 corridor, the government and the Treasury in particular understands the powerhouse of new technology and manufacturing and export. However, I think it's going to take a great deal to get any power wrested away from the Treasury. My colleague Susan Kramer argued some time ago for local government to be allowed to raise bonds to cover some infrastructure costs. And I think that will be one of the things that could happen with trusting larger areas with raising their own funds. Because one of the eternal problems we've got, and why democracy is getting such a bad name, is when either government or local government can blame the other because of the resources problem. Too much, too little, not making enough savings. And until local government actually gets full fiscal responsibility, you won't have the power to do that. And I suspect that the times when you want to raise either council tax or raise bonds, should that come to fruition, you'd have to get the support of your local community. It works very well in America, and I cannot understand why it wouldn't work well here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ruth Dombey, leader of the London Borough of Sutton. Sal, I'm delighted that you're leading for us in the Lords on health and social care. You will know, as I do, that 90% of NHS funding goes straight to the hospitals, and yet 90% of healthcare is delivered outside of the hospitals. Given this broken business model, how do you see the future of health and social care in this country?
Well, there are some pockets of good practice which you might know about, because Sutton is certainly one of those areas. And I think it's not just about the funding model. And the whole point about the Better Care Fund was to try and force people to think in a different way and both work together, and for funding to go from the NHS to local government. And at that point, I was the overall health spokesperson in the Lords, and the pleas that were coming from the health sector saying this was desperately unfair because local government didn't know how to spend it. And yet some of the examples that I saw around the country show that it can work and is working, but it's only a start. And I think that one of the things that we're going to have to do is to make sure that the culture changes. And I think that the new chief exec of the NHS wants it to happen, but the monolith that is the NHS, making sure that that translates right the way down through the system, is going to take some time. So I think that the only way for it to happen is going to be through further funding coming from the health service to local government, hard as it will be.
Okay, number 2. And I think you have 2 questions, one beside you where you are and one just behind you.
Thank you very much. Sebastian Bowen from Herefordshire. Herefordshire is a beautiful county, but sparsely populated. Many beautiful little cottages and such, but behind the roses round the cottage door very often lurks poverty, unknown and unseen by very many people. Great place to visit, but very poorly waged as well. We also suffer from the fact that our schools are paid per child roughly half of what some of the inner city schools get. We have equal poverty, but we do not have the help that we need. What can be done about this?
When I was a chair of education in Cambridgeshire 20 years ago, we were very aware of this as a problem then. And we had campaigns along with other rural counties to try and get this changed. I think the only way it's going to be changed is if they reduce the unit from ward size deprivation down to sub-ward size deprivation, because otherwise the pockets of deprivation are just going to continue to be missed. But the statisticians are very unhappy about doing that. So you need to continue to campaign. And in Cambridgeshire, last year we made some progress after a 25-year campaign, cross-party campaign, to improve funding for schools, because we were one of the cliff edge authorities, with neighbouring Hertfordshire getting considerably more money than we got in Cambridgeshire. We knew we were having an effect about 15 years ago when you knocked on the doors of people in Cambridge and said, what's the one thing the county needs to do? And people would answer, you've got to get area cost adjustment for us. Only in Cambridge could you get that response. I'm not sure it would work everywhere else, but I think what we managed to do, and particularly through Julian Huppert, who was then my deputy on the council, and more recently the former MP for Cambridge, was to make ministers understand the impact of that. And that's why, as Lib Dems, we were really proud to be able to introduce the pupil premium, which actually looked at the proxy of free school dinners to provide extra support for the poorest children in our communities. So at least there is something going in, but I absolutely accept the premise that the overall funding coming into Herefordshire schools is not as it should be.
Okay, thank you.
Hi Sal, good to see you again. It's Tim Young, leader of the Labour Group on Colchester Borough Council, where we've been sharing power with the Liberal Democrats and the Independents since 2008. You might remember when we worked in Harlow, we had the joint leaders of the council, one Lib Dem, one Labour. There's a massive debate going on in social media, not necessarily in our national parties while we await our leadership elections, about the realignment of the centre-left. And I just wondered if you're able to say anything about that today.
Oh, thanks, Tim. Nice curveball. Yes, when we were going in, we were peers in the IDEA together, and Harlow was deemed to be a tough job, and it turned itself round really well, actually. So I think it shows the value of that work, which now I know the LGA does. So thank you for continuing to do that. Oh, right. Progressive left. I don't think there is any doubt that parties of the centre-left, progressive left, will continue to talk to each other. I think the electorate is not yet in a state where it would allow formal pacts. I think it would be very, very suspicious of that, and rightly so. So my personal ambition is for the parties of the centre-left and also the minority parties to come together to fight for proportional representation. Because then we won't see what happened in the general election this year, which was a travesty of what the people wanted. So I think that's the way forward.
Tim, can I just feed back to you what I hear from Labour colleagues who tell me how proud they were in 2010 to get the Labour NEC to say that they would not accept PR at any cost. That, I think, is one of the issues that we have to struggle with, because I don't see much evidence of change of that view here this week. I appreciate your nod. Okay, have we got any more questions? I know it's wonderful weather. Yes, gentleman in a pink shirt.
Thank you for recognising pink. My question, and it comes from a councillor from Shropshire, which is adjacent to Herefordshire, has many of the similar problems to Herefordshire, But where I want to come from is a bedroom tax. And I have many people living in my area who have lived there for some time due to the way my Conservative-controlled council interpreted the disabled living allowance and included anything in that in the benefit so that people were not able to claim benefit to enable them to help pay the bedroom tax. They were in great difficulty. I welcome the recent legal decision which now discounts that, but there are a number of residents in my area who would want to move but can't because their houses is not there. Views on the bedroom tax as such?
Right. The Lib Dems, just before the election, we decided to do a U-turn. I mean, I have no shame in calling it a U-turn. The bedroom tax, as our ministerial colleagues had been told it would work, wasn't working. The grants to local government to support the people who they might want to help not have to pay the bedroom tax wasn't being delivered. I'm not blaming local government for that. The finance problems that you were facing meant that it was extremely difficult to do. But the biggest thing that we were concerned about was the lack of houses for people to move into. And the Lib Dems had always said it would only ever work if there were properties for people to move to. The issue about the disabled is particularly poignant. We fought hard in the House of Lords for people with disabilities to be excluded from it. And we won for children, but bizarrely did not win for adults with disabilities. And yet they have exactly the same issues about having to use a bedroom to hold equipment and everything else. And I think with the further cuts that we're seeing to the Independent Living Fund and also the flexibility for some councils to hold back on grants and support means that the bedroom tax is becoming a very, very serious problem for people with disabilities. And we all need to make sure that we can persuade the government to change its mind. That, I'm afraid, doesn't mean DWP. It means George Osborne. We've got to change the mind in the Treasury about this.
Okay, thank you. We have two more in the centre from number 3, Ian, and then somebody several generations younger than Ian in front of him.
Only several. Ian Stewart, Cumbria. I'm really sorry, Sal, that this is another disability-related one, but it's about access to trains. And it's about time that Network Rail were brought into line with the rest of the world and complied with the Disability Discrimination Act, because it just ain't on their radar at the moment, and I believe that it should be.
Yes, and it's not just trains. As she said, speaking from her electric wheelchair, it's taxis. I arrived in Harrogate today. My aide had ordered me a wheelchair-friendly taxi, and I arrived and it couldn't take a wheelchair. It's not an electric wheelchair. And yet it still had the wheelchair sign above it. That happens everywhere I go. It's not just a Harrogate issue. But it's because a section of the Equality Act has not been implemented. And it's disgraceful in the same way that in London, which is regulated, and all buses now have the facility to be talking buses, it is only as good as the driver who remembers to turn it on. So that's about culture and training. And I've been turfed off a bus because a parent with a buggy refused to move out of the wheelchair space. So that this is all about cultural issues and training. And absolutely it needs to change. I am a member of a new select committee in the House of Lords that's looking at disability and the Equality Act 2010. And that section that hasn't been enacted is going to be one of our major focuses, and we certainly need to do so. I do know that in the last government that any new franchises that were being tendered, there were much stronger bits in there about lifts at stations as well as access to trains. I mean, it is woeful that Luton Parkway has a lift, but Luton doesn't. The argument is it doesn't need it because there's one at Luton Parkway. It's ridiculous. Luton is a large town.
Thank you.
Yes, I just want to know what...
Who are you? Introduce yourself, laddie.
Andrew Martin, Belton Council, Lib Dem. I just want to know what role you think councils have in tackling poor and struggling schools.
Well, it's not the same as the government's. Poor and struggling schools need the support of their local councils. I come from the glorious days when budgets were first delegated down to schools, but with a proper local inspectorate and support service, so that if the inspector was concerned, you would have a team going in, a team, not one person going in, to work with the school to improve standards. Everything that's happened over the last two governments, both the coalition government and the Labour one before it, have been to reduce that and to say local government bad. And if there is yet another press release that talks about academies and free schools releasing schools from local government control, I will throw my radio across the room, because I know that that is not true. The powers that local government have are very limited. The responsibilities that you have are very great. So in my world, I would like to see you have specific grants from government for special needs, proper funding for special needs, proper funds for support following Ofsted inspections where support might be needed, and shock horror, support where actually the local council believes that there's a reason to go in and provide support as well. And just one other thing, there was a question in the Lords this week asking about what should happen when schools were failing and should they be turned into academies and free schools. And the Minister kept, of course, saying, yes, that's the absolute route. And I then said, but what happens if the failing school is an academy or free schools? Will you give local government and the local area the chance to reclaim that school? Answer, no.
Final question, number one.
Thank you. Roy Perry, leader of Conservative-controlled Hampshire County Council. One of the big issues that the nation will have to address in the next 2 years is the referendum on the British membership of the European Union. Do you see that as having any relevance at all for local government?
Yes, I do. I think every single group, whether it's an authority or business, has to think about the role of Europe. It's really good that the CBI have come out so positively in favour of Europe. I'm very sorry for the Eurosceptics in the audience. I am a passionate pro-European. I joined the Liberals in '74 in the run-up to the European Community election in referendum in '75. So actually, now we're going to have a referendum. We've got to start campaigning. And most of the business people I talk to are quite clear. They see the benefits. Now, as Lib Dems, we say it's not perfect, it needs reform, we need to reduce some of the fat, we need to make it more accountable. But that doesn't mean that we should walk away from Europe. It's really important that we're there. And as far as we're concerned, it would be worse to be out, but have to follow the rules of Europe. So local authorities, I mean, I don't know, no, I'm sorry, I shouldn't start a sentence with I don't know. I know that very few European grants are available for local government these days, but the areas where you do get it, it is vitally important to help very deprived communities. And you need to be able to say that, because that's part of the money that we're getting back. And we do know that actually we do get back as much as we pay in different forms. So I do hope the voice of local government will be there neutrally, because actually one of the problems of the last two referendums in this country has been people seeing it as only a party issue. Actually, what we need to do as communities is to say, do we need Europe? And in my book, we do.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of our time here in the hall. So many thanks to Sal for your intelligent and insightful speech and comments, and thanks, that's very much appreciated. Thank you very much indeed, colleagues, for coming in. It's a beautiful day outside, so your sacrifice to be with us here is much appreciated. And 3 quick announcements. The next is that there are fringe meetings that take place from now in the locations that are in your agenda. There's reception at 6 o'clock in the exhibition area if you want a glass of wine, and there are group dinners for everybody apart from the independents tonight, and I think thinking about the weather, people will be happy if dress code is slightly more informal than might have been if it had been less warm than today. So thank you very much indeed for your time, and I think there's a group coming in for the next session now, so thank you very much, Sal. Goodbye.